This Steve Jones Show podcast is now loading. The Steve Jones Show podcast is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, Brewers Outlet, and NIL Game Changers. Bringing you an in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, Brewers Outlet, and NIL Game Changers. Now from the Sunbury Motors Studio, here's Steve Jones.
Great to be with you on another rainy day, to the point where it's flooding all over the place here. They've closed schools here, believe it or not, because of the flooding.
Here, too. My daughter gets out in about a minute.
Oh, well, America beware.
How about it?
This half hour of the show brought to you by our good friends at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket. Imports, domestics, microbrews, the best selection of beer anywhere. Wine coolers, water, soft drinks, snacks. They roast their peanuts fresh and hot every day. Pickle bar, led by the barrels and the dills. Indeed, second to none. All at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket. And the great Jim Jackson now joins us on the line. First of all, welcome back. Long time no here. It's just great to have you back on the other end of the line again.
Good to be here. How are you guys doing?
Right. Doing great, and hope you're doing well. So, how do you assess where the Flyers are in the reboot, the season, and where they're positioned moving forward?
Well, I mean, we're 6 games from the end of the season, so any broad assessment we'll wait until we see what happens in these next 6 games, because obviously it could drastically change how they end up this season, whether they're in the playoffs or not. But broad strokes, looking at it, I went into this season hoping for this team to play meaningful games in March and April. They have done that. Hoping for the younger players to take bigger roles on the team, and many of them have done that. I thought that if Carter Hart was going to be here the whole season, and if Sean Couturier and Cam Atkinson came back and were very important players all season long, that this team could make the playoffs. Those two things aren't necessarily happening. Obviously, Carter's gone. Cam has been in and out of the lineup, and Sean Couturier is now injured and also has seen his ice time reduced. So some of that hasn't come true, and yet they're still very much in contention. So I think when you look back at this season, most of what the organization wanted to accomplish has been accomplished. Now, the cherry on top of that would be a playoff spot, because then you get to have some of these players, the 24, 25-year-old players and younger, experience playoff hockey, which is a completely another step in terms of the way hockey is played. So I think they want to get that. At the beginning of the year, I don't think it was a necessity by any stretch. They just wanted to have a competitive team. They've accomplished that goal. But when you sit in a playoff position for 100, and I think it's up to 111 straight days now, the Flyers have been in a playoff position. Yep. When you've been in a playoff position that long, you want to be in those playoffs.
No question. So how have the fans reacted to all this? Because it's it's a great hockey town. So how have they reacted now to how this has played out?
Well, it's been a roller coaster for them. They've had a lot to deal with. This team has had the Cutter Gauthier situation, the Carter Hart situation. They've had some injuries. They've had, obviously, the trade deadline, what to do there. They've had John Tortorella, who is constantly, of course, making news and grabbing headlines. So there's been a lot of, as they say, noise around the team. So for the fans, I think it's been entertaining. I think the fans' biggest desire was to see a team that would play hard and would be competitive. Any sports team in Philadelphia that gets that kind of moniker, gets that kind of label, is automatically popular. In fact, there are some teams in this town that did not win championships that had that moniker that were probably more popular than some of the teams that won championships. Some of the 93 Phillies come to mind, and some other teams like that. The Flyers had a couple teams that came close in the 80s that had tremendous followings, even though they didn't win the Cup. So it can definitely happen. This team is obviously, I don't think they're even going to the Stanley Cup Finals, but they have been competitive. They've been competitive with some of the best teams in the league. So I think the fans in general are good with this season. I think the new management team of Keith Jones and Dan Hilferty, along with Danny Briere and going down to Torts, they've done a great job of messaging so that the fans understand what this season's about. That's why they trade Sean Walker at the deadline. I mean, this team's probably more than a couple points in the playoffs right now if they have Sean Walker in the lineup for the last month. But they traded him to get a first-round pick because they're still looking at the eye in the sky, which is success down the road, continued, sustained success. I mean, being a Stanley Cup contender year after year, and that's where this team wants to end up. So they've managed to stay competitive while still accumulating some more assets for the future. So I'd say that's a job well done, and I think most of the fans realize that. Which,
by the way, I admire, because the one thing you don't want to be, and I use this all the time regardless of sport, you don't want to be the Atlanta Hawks. Good enough to make the playoffs, not good enough to advance, which means you're not in a spot to get a quality draft pick to change things, which has been there over and over and over again. And it sounds like Keith Jones and his staff have an eye on much more than just making the playoffs in future years.
They do, and certainly more than what the Flyers were the last decade, which basically was in the playoffs one year, out the next,
right.
And then the last three they haven't been in at all. So they definitely see that you have to accumulate assets. They instead of drafting a sure thing pick with their high pick last year, they go for Matvei Michkov, who might not be here in 3 years, for 3 years, but when he gets here, is probably going to be that high end kind of talent you need to have. So they're forward thinking for sure. And I think the fans are aboard with that. The fans have had enough of the being, as you say, the Atlanta Hawks of the NHL, which I don't know if the Flyers would even say they were that the last 3 years because they were out of the playoffs. But during the 2010s, they after they went to the finals in 2010, and then they had a couple of second-round bids there the next 2 years, they then went every other year in the playoffs out after one round for 10, 11 years, a record for the NHL. So they literally were just in and out, in and out, in and out. And they were never terrible, but they were never great. And so I think this management team's aim is to get to that great level again. And I think the fans are willing to sacrifice. And in saying that, they haven't had to sacrifice the way, let's say, the Sixers tried to do it by just tanking 3 straight years. They've been competitive and are actually still alive for a playoff spot with less than 2 weeks to go. So it hasn't really been as painful as perhaps it was for the Sixers fans.
Yes, Dick Girardi and I have had many a conversation about the Sixers rebuild. All right. So, when it gets, I want to ask you about John Tortorella. The fans will see the personality, they'll see the quotes and so forth. What kind of coach is he? And is he the kind of coach that gets the best out of his talent as you watch him play, as you watch him up close?
I do believe he is. First of all, let me say this about John. The John Tortorella that you see in press conferences most of the time, because he just had a press conference today that was outstanding. If you have a chance to go on YouTube or wherever and watch it, it's a great talk about coaching and about expectations and about his own style. And he was very forthright after he criticized the team the other night, and it was just a great press conference today. He does give the great press conferences, but he also has those where he walks in and is done in 30 seconds and, where he berates a reporter or whatever. That's not really the John Tortorella you see very much away from the ice. He's one of the nicest human beings I've been around. He's very caring. He's a big animal lover, everybody knows that. But he's also just he cares about human beings. He cares about these players as men. So he is a great guy. His temper, he definitely has a temper, and his temper gets the best of him sometimes. But the bottom line is, as a coach, he's a great coach. This team is not in a spot right now, sitting in a playoff spot with less than 2 weeks to go in the season without John Tortorella as the coach. I can name so many examples of players where he disciplined them in some way, and then they ended up playing some of their best hockey immediately afterwards. Now, there is a thought, and I'm not saying that there isn't some validity to this, that because he goes to the whip like that he might have a shorter shelf life than other coaches. But I will point out that he was in Columbus a long time.
Yeah, he was.
That team, if you look at their overall record as a franchise, before John Tortorella was there, near the bottom of the NHL. While John Tortorella was there, pretty good. And since John Tortorella left, at the bottom of the NHL. So, I mean, he's a good coach. He definitely knows how to get players to play hard. Some players don't like it. Some players don't like it, and they can't get along with it. And usually, they will separate. They'll go their separate ways. Other players don't like it maybe in the beginning, but tend to like it later on. I've talked to several of his former players. Zach Werenski comes to mind, the defenseman for the Columbus Blue Jackets, who said early on he just drove me crazy, but he now thinks that he's the reason he's such a good player. So I think you hear a lot more of those kind of players than you do the ones who didn't like John, more that give him credit for making them better players. And that's what he's all about. That's why he got back into this. He loves the teaching. He loves the making them better players, better men. And I think that's what drives him, and I think he's still very good at it.
See, Jim, that's exactly the answer I expected to hear, because I've always been big on him as a coach, always, and I've always heard behind the scenes that, hey, look, what you see at the press conference is not the guy. And I'm glad you were able to at least talk about that, because
it isn't at all. He's very polite. He's very respectful. He's always interested in finding things out about other people, about if you're having a conversation with him. It's not him just telling you about himself. He wants to find out about you. So he's a great human being, and that part of it, he cares about his players too. And as we all probably dealt with our parents at one point or another, sometimes tough love does have to be applied, and John Tortorella does use tough love quite often, and some of the players can handle it, some can't. But the ones that can are probably the guys you want to ride with into the playoffs, trying to get to where you want to get to eventually. So I think there's a method to his madness for sure.
So down the stretch, Sabres, Jackets, Canadians, then Rangers, Devils, and Caps. How do you feel about how the latter part of the schedule plays out for Philadelphia?
I hesitate to do that, Steve, because...
Well, no, I'm not saying wins and losses, but I'm talking about the opportunities, Jim.
They had a gauntlet of 7 straight games against top 10 teams, and then they had 6 straight against teams that were nowhere near the top 10.
Right.
And they made it through that gauntlet playing pretty good hockey, gaining some points, feeling pretty good about themselves, and they haven't won since. They got to the stretch where they're playing teams out of the playoffs. So, you look at the schedule, there's absolutely winnable games there. There's huge games, too. Obviously, the Washington game is looking like it's going to be a huge contest, so there's going to be some games in there you have to win, but I'm thinking if they win 4 out of the 6, it's going to be pretty tough. Let's say 8 points or 8 or 9 points. Maybe they get an overtime loss in one of the other ones. 8 or 9 points, to me, will probably get them in, given the pace of the race, which has not been exactly quick here of late. The teams have been really struggling once they get into playoff position or get near it. So we'll see. You better watch out for those Penguins. They're suddenly hot. They've got, obviously, the pedigree with Crosby and Malkin and Letang and those guys. And all these teams, one of them gets hot right now, and they all have 7 or 8, 9 games remaining. Actually, it's like 6 through 8 now, 6, 7, 8 games remaining. You get hot in that stretch and win 5 or 6 of those, you're probably going to make the playoffs. Any of those teams. So it's wild. There's so many teams now involved. The Flyers have helped to involve some of those teams by struggling here of late, but now you've got about 5 teams battling for 2 spots, and it'll be quite interesting. But for the Flyers, I think something like 4-1-1 or 4-2 might even do it. Yeah. 3-3-2 maybe, I don't know, but 8 or 9 points out of that group, I think, puts a lot of pressure on those other teams to play some really good hockey. So they should be all right. But they, not to sound like a cliche coach here, but they basically do have to take it game by game right now. They've got to get a win. They haven't had a win in their last 5. They've got to get a win, and that starts Friday in Buffalo. John Tortorella today talked about the fact that they're going to go in, the coaching staff, and talk with the players tomorrow before practice and basically talk mindset. And this basically sounds like that meeting you have where you basically set the tone for what's left of this season. And he's a little bit concerned, I think, that there's this thought out there that nobody expected the Flyers to do anything this year. So here they are. They're regressing to the mean. This was going to happen all along. And he said BS to that in the press conference, and I think he's going to say that to his players. He said, we're here. We deserve to be here. Now let's go out and grab it. And we'll see how they respond on Friday.
Yeah, because, that's exactly what, for example, I'll tell my broadcasting class. I said, you can't do the next game. You can only do the game in front of you. So when you hear the cliche, one game at a time, I said, that's actually your job, too.
Oh, absolutely is. I have a theory. I know some broadcasters who, for instance, this weekend, the Flyers are playing Friday, Saturday, and some of them start doing some of their work for Saturday before the game on Friday, broadcasters. And they can do that. I personally can't do that because I think I'll start calling Columbus Blue Jackets players Buffalo Sabres players because we're playing Columbus on Saturday, Buffalo on Friday. I need to keep that compartment. What do they call that? You put it compartment. Keep it in that one compartment, and basically that's the next game. And then I'll worry about Saturday. I'll crash. I'll work very hard between the games Friday and Saturday and get ready for the Columbus game. But for now, the Flyers just have to worry about the Sabres on Friday. A win there, the Sabres are pretty much out. If the Flyers win that one in regulation, you can start eliminating teams and start thinking positive about themselves again. Because this team really, Steve, there have been teams before, even Flyers teams that I've covered, that have been in contention for the playoffs, but they were there because the goalie was hot or because they were pretty fortunate. This team has outplayed teams pretty consistently this year. They can do that. They could outplay teams all 6 of these games the rest of the way. And if they do, their chances are pretty good. They've got to get some saves. It might be from the big Russian or they're going to get the saves from now, but they got to get some saves because they aren't getting them lately. Their save percentage since the middle of January is about 20 percentage points below any team in the NHL. It's very hard to win with that. And I'm not saying Sam Harrison has been terrible. They've given up a lot of 10-bell chances, but they just haven't been getting those big clutch saves from whoever's been between the pipes. And they got to get those in these final 6. Who that goalie is going to be might be one of the more interesting stories.
Jim, you're the best. Thanks so much. Really appreciate the time today.
All right. Appreciate talking with you guys. Enjoy the lovely weather.
Yeah. Thanks. the great Jim Jackson joining us this half hour, being brought to you by our good friends at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket, imports domestics, microbrews, the best selection of beer anywhere. Wine coolers, water, soft drinks, snacks. They roast their peanuts fresh and hot every day. Pickle bar led by the barrels and the dills, indeed second to none, here on News Radio 1070 WKOK.
Spring has sprung, and it's time to dust off those insurance policies. For over 100 years, the Purdy Insurance Agency has been protecting families and businesses of the greater Susquehanna Valley and beyond. With the experience of our trained and knowledgeable staff, you can rest assured that your needs will be evaluated and met by some of the industry's best representatives. No matter what your insurance needs are, call Purdy Insurance today at 570-286-5855 or visit our website at purdyinsurance.com to see what we can do for you.
When car repairs get difficult.
Well, I just don't know.
Me neither.
We get good. Sunbury Motors. More than quality new and used cars, Sunbury Motors specializes in complicated auto repair diagnosis. They can handle intricate repairs and even complete auto body with service open Monday through Friday, 7 till 4. And Sunbury Motors has made simple repairs easy. Maintaining your vehicle is necessary. Finding the time to do it is difficult. Welcome to Sunbury Motors Quick Lane. Just walk in or call ahead. Relax in their remodeled waiting room with Wi-Fi, beverages, and snacks. While Sunbury Motors factory-trained techs take care of your oil change, tire alignments, brakes, and inspections. Quick Lane, 6:30 to 6 Monday through Friday, Saturday 6:30 till 2. Sunbury Motors, Ford and Hyundai, North 4th Street, Sunbury. And Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf. We take the out of auto repair.